We can record it because then we have this opportunity to spread it out to a further, to a larger audience. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. So, all
Love
right.
the options.
I think what I'll do then is I'm going to start and get my icon back up here. Why don't it? There we go. All right.
So
So,
I will go check on Teresa and I'll see what's going on. If you give me 1 second, I'll
Okay.
okay.
go
All
All
right.
right.
No
what's
worries.
up.
So those that are with us and watching are about to join. We are just giving a couple minutes for our panelists to come in today, and we're having Brian and Teresa Melendez. We're very excited to have them join us.
Yes, we are.
Just going to give it one more minute, and then we'll get going here. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah. And actually, you know what? Because the screen doesn't show them while we do the introductions, we certainly could start the introductions, but we can wait. Okay.
Because he just stepped out.
Yeah. Yeah. So those of you listening on the Podbean and those of you waiting on Facebook to enjoy this webinar, we're just waiting for our panelists. Thank you for sitting tight and hanging there and waiting with us. They are just getting themselves ready.
We're just building up some anticipation regarding today's
Absolutely.
great discussion with Brian and Teresa Melendez.
Yep, a candid conversation about systemic racism. You can put questions in the chat or on Facebook or on the Podbean. You can certainly interact with us as well, and we'll do what we can to stay on top of it all. Yeah. Just giving you a few more minutes, everybody. Hoping to,
We'll be
okay.
jumping on here really quick. I just
Okay.
went and double checked on her.
All right, thank you, Brian. So we're going to go ahead and start some introductions because we'll start with myself and Misha, and then
Yeah.
we'll introduce Brian and Teresa. That will give Teresa a minute more to hop on with us. So my name is Jodi Lewis. I'm here with Misha Safran. We are co-hosting, co-facilitating a candid conversation about systemic racism. This really was Misha's brainstorm and brainchild. She started this when we had George Floyd's murder and then all the other murders past and present. And her idea was really to start a webinar to have candid conversations and really have members from the BIPOC community come in and be able to speak about their experiences and whatever they wanted to share with anyone who was attending, and also giving it out to a broader audience through live streaming on Facebook, and she has a podcast channel as well. So just a little bit about me. I'm very excited to be here and that Misha has given me the opportunity to co-host and co-facilitate this, given the fact that it's such a crucial conversation that we need to be having in our society, and to continue to have and be authentic about what's happening in this country. I am an attorney. I'm actually a legal director for a nonprofit organization, the Women's Resource Center in Northeastern Pennsylvania, and we provide legal services and other services for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And Misha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, let me just get this situated for Teresa. I did make you a co-host, so you should be able to turn your screen on. Teresa, there you go. Awesome. Oh, yay, she's here.
There we go. Hello, hello.
We're just doing some introductions, and then we're going to, Jodi's going to introduce you as well, and Teresa and Brian. So I'm Misha Safran, like Jodi said. And yeah, I'm just, it's interesting. I am sharing this conversation as globally as I can with my partner. Jodi and I are partners. And so while the BIPOC, and that's another reason why you can see the symbol on the title page is reflective of all colors, sexual orientation. I believe, diversity is how we find joy in this life. And that when we start to deny the existence of anyone's life, we are going to suffer, all of us. And so I strongly believe in the ability to have conversations, not and even arguments, but in a healthy, loving way. This conversation is not about arguments. This conversation is a platform for BIPOC community members to really share what is in their hearts and on their minds in a safe place. And I do have scaffolding and other resources that we provide to our attendees when the webinar is over. We send an email out that has confirmed their attendance, and also those who have missed the webinar. So if you're watching this on a replay, then you can certainly send a message to us or email us requesting those resources on how to be an anti-racist. This platform is not generally used as a tool to educate white people. It is a tool for the BIPOC community to be able to articulate what they need to articulate without judgment and with a lot of love. So I raised 5 children. 3 of them I birthed myself. I've been an educator for over 30 years, and I'm currently a heartstring healer and joy coach. I also work with students and parents. I'm an academic life coach and parenting coach, and I am trilingual, speaking French, Spanish, and English. And I can read bits and pieces of other languages, and I'm also a singer-songwriter. But I am a human, and I am a lover of people and diversity, and just really excited that Brian and Teresa have accepted the invitation to be with us this evening. You're dear to my heart because of your relationship you have with my son, and of course, we could talk about him all night, but that's not what we're here for. So, Jodi, you want to introduce it?
Yeah. So, we'd love to introduce Brian and Teresa tonight. Teresa is an enrolled citizen of the Pokagon band of. Please help me, Teresa, with pronunciation because I don't want to mess it up and I don't want to be disrespectful.
No problem. It's Pokagon band of Potawatomi.
Potawatomi Nation from Southwest Michigan. She is the CEO of TallTree Indigenous Education Consulting, Vice Chair of the Nevada Statewide Native American Caucus, and a founding member of Native Voters Alliance Nevada and the Nevada Native Vote Project. Teresa has a bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's degree in higher adult and lifelong education, both from Michigan State University. She has spent the last 15 years working in college prep and success, training and development, Indigenous language and cultural revitalization, and youth leadership. In recent years, Teresa has thrown herself into Native grassroots political organizing.
She's good at it too.
Yes. And on her free time, you can find her on the Powwow Trail as a competitive fancy shawl dancer and coordinator of the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony Powwow Club. And that is a lot you have done and are continuing to do. We're so excited to have you with us here today, Teresa.
I absolutely love that photo too. So
I took that photo.
It's just, there's conviction, there's pride, there's beauty. You don't like that photo?
He says he took the photo. He didn't take that photo.
Oh.
Taking the
I
credit.
did that dress too. I think I sewed it all together too.
And the beat shirt.
All right, I guess we'll move on to Brian now.
That's impressive.
Let's make it about Brian now.
Yeah. And this is another great photograph too. Both of them are just stunning photographs.
I took that photo too.
You did. Yes, a selfie. So Brian B.B. Melendez is a northern southern Great Western Shoshine from the Great Basin and enrolled tribal citizen of the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony. For the past 2 decades, he has been a grassroots organizer, a spiritual leader, Sundance chief of his tribe's summer ceremonies and other ritual dances, a formerly elected tribal legislator, a law enforcement officer for the state of Nevada, a former federal operations officer for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the CEO of Lucent Turn, LLC, an indigenous consulting firm, a published American Indian spirituality scholar, the host of the Coffee with an Indian podcast, and the president/CEO of Tribal Minds Incorporated, a Native nonprofit. Brian has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, a master's degree in justice management, and is currently applying to law school. In his free time, Brian is composing a novel and hoping to be completed with this task by the year's end.
What free time, Brian?
Anytime we get now, we just add more work to it. So,
and for those that are with us here today and listening on whether it be live stream on the Facebook or on the podcast, you can see that Brian and Teresa have done many, many things and are here today. We're just so delighted to have them to share with us their experiences as members of the BIPOC community. So Brian and Teresa, we love if you want to add anything regarding your background that we missed, and just speak from your heart, whatever you're willing and wanting to share with us. We would love to hear.
Husband, you'd like to go first?
Go ahead, wife.
All right. So, Bojo, Kwe Badasan se Indigenous, Pokagon, Potawatomi, meanwhile Odawa, meanwhile Polish and Dow, Michigan and Dodem, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Nadonjaba, Reno, Nevada, and Dida. Hello, my name is Teresa Melendez. My Anishinaabe name is Woman Walking Forward. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi out of Southwest Michigan, Northern Indiana, and a descendant of the Little River Band of Odawa and of Polish descent. I'm Turtle Clan, and I was born and raised in Kalamazoo, Michigan as an urban Indian, and then fell in love with this handsome Paiute man right here, and then found my way to Nevada. So I've been in Nevada for about 9 years and calling Nevada my new home. Thank you, Misha and Jodi, for inviting my husband and I to join you for this conversation. So Misha mentioned that our connection is through her son, who about 2 years ago, Ethan called up and said, hey, I would really like to, take on a research project looking at Native voter data in Nevada because it's missing, and we realize that Native people are often neglected, and data is a huge part of that invisibility. And what can I do to help you guys out? And we were like, all right. Really? You're a data wonk? We love it. We need you. And then from there, we didn't let him go, did we, babe? We were like,
No.
we're like, you're ours. So we've kind of adopted him like a brother, even though he's more like, closer to the age of a son. We're always joking like, dang, we could be your parents. But Ethan's amazing. So Misha, we thank you and your family for sharing him with us. And we wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the work that we've been doing with mobilizing Native voters and even building out the Native Caucus if it wasn't for Ethan and his experience as a young person. He's really mature and has a big heart for social justice and for people who've been communities that have just been traumatized and been through hard experiences. So we really appreciate Ethan. And you know what Ethan has taught us? And I think it's part of this conversation too, but we didn't realize we needed Ethan. We were used to being in communities and circles where we were used to being told no, that we can't ask for certain things. Like we can't ask for voting access rights. We can't ask for polling locations. We can't ask for tuition waivers because there's a price tag. And then Ethan started telling us like, oh, hell no, they're not doing that. We're not accepting that. We are not being nice to racists. That's Ethan's line. We're not being nice to racists. And so like we needed Ethan to tell us that, to be able to open our eyes to see how colonized we were in a lot of our own conversations and thinking, and like just our own institutional trauma that we just have been passing out from generation to generation. So we're
That's
really
how
great.
he responded to house rules too. No, I'm just kidding. Hell no.
That's hilarious.
No. I'm sure he'll see this at some point. I better be careful.
I love that. So Misha, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Jodi, it's a pleasure to meet you also. Thank you for having us on today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Potawatomi so opichasa beach na manato. Hamo. Inaniana depina no do kahaga pijata mi bohakima. My name is Brian Melendez. I'm Northern Southern Paiute, Western Shoshone from Reno, Nevada. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony. My reservation is located right in the middle of the city of Reno, and which is very different for a lot of reservations across the country. Most of them, I would imagine, are very rural in nature, and if you want to get to a reservation, it actually takes you a lot of work. Here, if you just land in the city of Reno, get off a plane, you're pretty much like right by the reservation. And so the reservation was in the middle of the city, and as you can imagine, it didn't start out that way. They built around it. So we basically became encapsulated by a city because of the traditional homelands where our people were living. My tribe, my community has two distinct reservations. One that's right in the middle of the city, and one is just outside of the city, up in the mountains, a little higher up outside of the city, northeast of the Reno-Sparks area, probably about 12 miles as the crow flies. And that reservation is called Hungry Valley. And so the Hungry Valley Indian Reservation is where Teresa and I were living up until around April of last year. And so the Hungry Valley Indian Reservation is beautiful. It's up in the mountains, high desert. It's a gorgeous place, and it's home. And so I grew up for the better part of my life in and around the reservation in that space. And so that's kind of how that worked out. I met Teresa a while ago, and here we are, still doing it. And so we're just doing the thing as, husband and wife. And my wife said, I'm going to go to Reno, and we're going to get married, and I'm just going to live with you, and we're going to figure it out. And that's what we've been doing ever since. So we've just been doing it. So it's been working out pretty well. So, one thing I could say, and I just want to add this little sentiment about Ethan, because I know we're talking about Ethan. And I just want to elaborate, because I know what Teresa said, and it makes sense to us. And the discussion is like, there's a colonization that has occurred. There's this issue that has occurred within, these spaces where the system itself has perpetuated this thought and this belief to make people feel as if they don't have the ability, whether that be in their mind or even structurally, to get themselves out of these holes that were created by other institutions. And so when we have that discussion and we say, well, maybe we can, or maybe we can't do something. And my wife is absolutely correct. It comes from a long history of just being beaten down lots of different ways. And so when the community structure has faced that much disappointment and there's not an upside to operation, we don't realize within ourselves how that is impacting the decisions that we make. Because Teresa and I are very capable in the work that we do, and professionally and personally in all different types of ways, to see our ways out of lots of different mazes. But when it came to the work, working with other groups, diverse groups, other nonprofits, local entities, elected officials, and all these other people, it was really, really imperative that we had alternate perspectives and worldviews in our space, which is very different maybe from a lot of the work that you will see with other organizations. Some organizations are a little bit more inclusive or exclusive, but for us, I think we find ourselves kind of in a good mix of things, because we don't lose any of our authenticity or any of our focus on the core, projects of our communities. It's just when it comes to certain outlooks of ourselves having to migrate into white space, that is a place where we just, there's so much that we just don't know, right? And I could see how confusing it is for us to have to go into white space, because when we see non-Native people come into our space, they don't know what the hell's going on either. So, I mean, it completely makes a lot of sense how complicated this is, but that we're juggling through these institutions. I know Ethan has been very, very helpful. So much more helpful than I can even give him credit for right now. I think me saying that he's helpful is a severe understatement to his actual impact in our tribal space and in the state. Misha, I don't know, you should be extremely proud.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna cry right now.
Proud
I was just thinking, I'm tearing up.
Because the work that your son is helping us do is bringing forward the Nevada tribal issues 20 years. We've fast forwarded 20 years in about 2 years because we've had Ethan on our team and the work we've been able to do. So I just want to tell you that, you have brought a very beautiful soul into this world, and he's doing some great work with us and in the Indigenous front, and it's amazing. So I'm proud of Ethan. I love Ethan. We support Ethan, and he's basically going to be with us forever. So we're just going to have to get So we brought Ethan he came out to the reservation. Like, we went to temple with Ethan, and then we were like, Ethan, come out to the reservation. And they were like, we're going to take him to the reservation. And so we went out to the reservation. We're out there burning fires and ceremonies and rituals. Like, so Ethan's with us through this whole process. And so it's been really nice to kind of have that interface and really see how this, can really be built out. So I guess the long and short of that narration, which is that, as a organizational body in the work that we do, we want to work with with amazing people who have great hearts and who want to do the work and see, this come, this expansion for all people, for peace and harmony to come to fruition. And so I'm really grateful to you, Misha and Jodi, for allowing us to have this opportunity to have a discussion. You probably didn't think we were going to be talking about your son for like probably the first 15 minutes, but it wouldn't be a proper race examination or systemic, discussion without talking about Ethan.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's interesting. I'm going to turn over things to Jodi, but I have to say that I don't even know if Ethan knows. He must know, but my dad, we used to go to reservations and participate in powwows, and there was this entity for us. My dad also helped create different sites for Head Start so that there were childcare services available in different areas for the diverse population. And so my son actually gets it from my dad, his grandfather. And my father has been wanting to support him and you, and just like very excited about all the work you guys are doing. And so I think we need to share the same love, which is thank you for welcoming him in and not keeping him on the outside, because he definitely doesn't belong on the outside. He does have a huge heart, and as do you, and that's why you're drawn together. And so, yeah, I'll just say thank you for accepting him and inviting him. And he's really in his element. He is just absolutely loving the work he does for you.
It's
And
great.
that's part of his desire to be an activist. I mean, he was an activist in high school when he noticed that there was some indiscrepancies around race there, and things were happening that weren't getting fixed and that weren't addressing certain student needs. And he wrote a letter to the administration, and of course they poo-pooed it until something got serious and got to the paper. And then they're like, oh, we'll take care of it. So he's a firecracker. I mean, he's going to go right there. And I'm glad he's doing it with you, because your community, your people need it. And it's just beautiful that you're willing to work together. Yeah, it's just very meaningful. So thank you for the accolades on behalf of my son.
I wish he was on this call just so we can see him like making faces. That's
I know.
I shared this video on Facebook and tagged him in it. So I was like, Ethan's got to see it. We're talking about him.
Oh, good. Okay. All right.
Let's jump into it. What do we want to? Do you have any questions or any particular direction you'd like to go into? Maybe we can.
Yeah, I do have questions, but I was wondering if Brian and Teresa, is there anything that you wanted to share with people that are watching and listening?
For sure. I think before we jump into the process, I think it might make a little bit more sense to kind of elaborate on some of the work that we're doing and kind of the focal point of our projects.
Absolutely.
So for those, because there's people on here, I'm sure there'll be people from all over the country, but all over the world. So we're located right now in the Reno-Sparks area, so up in northern Nevada. So for a lot of you people, maybe never been this far, west, but we're in Nevada. So in Nevada, there are two large metro areas. One is down south, which is Las Vegas, and then one is up north, which is in Reno, where we are right now. So we're up here in this area. There are 27 federally recognized tribes and colonies in Reno, or in Nevada proper. And so just around Reno area alone, within 100-mile circumference, there's 7 really large reservations. And so the work that we do, we work with all different types of tribes, tribal people, tribal governments, community centers, and then any other kind of individual organization or individual who has a vested interest in seeing tribal mobility and the empowerment of the indigenous base here in Nevada. So back in 2019, 2020, well, what's it, 2020 now, 2021, I started putting together the idea of a nonprofit because of the work that we were doing. We had always been engaged in the community. And so we've always been working in the community side of things. And Teresa can attest to this, but our home, when we were on the reservation, became the center point for all of the organization and the grassroots work that we were doing, which is very different than I would say maybe a lot of communal structures, because for tribal indigenous communities and in our way of life, the culture itself has a lot to do with the home and the people within the home. So it's like the ceremonies are happening in the home. Everything's happening with the home structure. And so it became a large base. And so we got to the point where we would have events, we'd have ceremonies, we'd have stuff going on, and we'd have, you know, sometimes there'd be like 50, 60, 70, 80 people in the home. And we started getting to the place where like, we would think about logistically how much work we're doing, and we need more space. Like we've completely outgrown the space. And then even within the tribal confines of what that looked like, we needed to expand more. And not only through the expansion, but through the formalization. Because what we were doing was we were putting a lot of our own resources, and have been putting a lot of our own resources in for a lot of years, back into the community, back into the structures, back into everything. And so there wasn't very many things that we weren't, you know, directly integrated into, that wasn't coming directly out of our pockets. And so it got to the point where the organizational work that we had to do had to become more formalized, so we would have more resources to give back to the communities. So we went through the process of formalizing a nonprofit here in Nevada. So the nonprofit is called Tribal Minds Incorporated. And so we're an Indigenous nonprofit in the area that right now is focusing on three main centers of work. So the first body of work that we worked on, because we just got started, like the organization part took a little while to get squared away, as you're aware. It just takes a long time to go through the organizational mechanisms. So over the past electoral cycle, we worked on a project. Ethan was a co-founder of that. So Ethan and Teresa and I put together the Nevada Native Vote Project. And we focused on voter education, voter turnout, voter advocacy, enhancing polling locations. Teresa could talk, a lot about that, the extensive part of kind of that work. And so we focus a lot on civic engagement in that end. So that's the civic engagement arm of Tribal Minds Incorporated. And then we have two other specific focuses that we work on. And both of those other focuses are getting rolled out right now. We're working on some of the program dimensions and in that capacity. But the other two is we focus on wellness. And so right now we're creating a center. It's called the Chief Good Day Spiritual Wellness Center, which will be a virtual space. And basically what we're going to be doing is offering virtual wellness to tribal communities across the country that don't have access to that type of wellness, whether it's movement or motion modalities, support groups, or anything like that they can't get access to, that they need in the time of COVID. And so our intent is to provide all of these services free of charge, and to provide these back to the communities. And so what our project focus is to bring in all instructors, people of color, to provide services and wellness back to the tribal communities. So this will be the first time that we've ever created a mechanism that will allow for cultural interactions between a lot of our, remote reservation people and other ethnic groups. And so we're providing this system, and we're hoping to see a huge transition from there. And then the other arm of the nonprofit is called the Sagebrush Institute, which is more of our think tank provision of the nonprofit. And in that focus, we spend a lot more time working on the analytics, the data collection, the research and development, quantitative and qualitative aspects of the work for tribal communities, because it's not enough to feel good and it's not enough to get people to vote, but we need the analytics and the requirements to proposition and make change at a state, local, federal, and tribal level. So in order to do that, we need to have the baseline data in place. So that's the arm of Tribal Minds that is going to help us to not only create the white papers that we need, but the academic approach to see it through, full fruition. So that is what we've been working on, intently over the past, year and a half, just hammering that out, getting it off the ground. We've had some really great success in a short amount of time, which has been tremendous. But I could talk about this forever, but I'm going to kick it over to my wife, and she can fill in the gaps and some of the other work that we're doing.
What was the name of the last one you were talking about, the third one?
The Sagebrush Institute.
Sagebrush. Okay. Thank you.
And I was just looking for the links as Brian was talking, so I just put up the link for the ND Native Caucus. I think Brian's building out the website for Tribal Minds right now. Yeah. So, but babe, I don't know if there's any other web links that you want to upload, but I uploaded the Native Caucus. There we go.
Okay.
Great.
Just the only thing I wanted to add to what Brian was saying was that we both have been working in our specific spheres in Indian communities, tribal communities. I worked primarily for the first part of my career in Indigenous language and cultural revitalization, and under the broad umbrella of Indian education. and Brian was like in justice and, as a probation officer, and then in governance at the federal level and tribal level. And then, but we both were running into these barriers in our, areas of work where it's like, we kept hitting these barriers and these ceilings where we knew that we needed change as communities. But we kept running into the, there is no funding, there's no pathway, there's no precedence, we just kept being told no. So it's like those opportunities that we really needed to be able to break through these challenges, we kept coming into obstacles. So then we were like, well, we're just gonna do this shit and we're just gonna create something new. And then, Ethan came along about that time also, and we all just ran with these ideas. And thankfully, and actually I don't believe in coincidence, but I feel like the universe brought the people into our lives that we needed to be able to do the work, and then also the resources and funding and all those things. They all just kind of came together at the right time. And so we're really grateful for that. That reminds me of a saying my husband has. A lot of times he'll ask for the ancestors or creator to bring the tools that we need to do the work, help us find those tools, or bring the people that we need to work with or that we need to meet to be able to do the work, let them find us. So I think that really, that's what happened in our situation.
The other end of that is the other end of that prayer is, let the people that don't need to find us, don't ever let them find us.
Oh, woohoo! Or let them learn quickly that their thoughts are wrong. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So that's a little background to how we got to where we are today. But a lot of this grassroots organizing work, this is all within like the last 2 years. And a lot of the work that we've done has been building on what other Indigenous leaders and community leaders have done in their states. So we're not always reinventing the wheel. It's just like, oh shoot, look at it, Michigan just started a Native Anishinaabe caucus. We should do that here in Nevada. Or it's like, oh, look what Arizona's doing with their their vote project. So we're really grateful to the people who have led the way and that have provided inspiration and hope, and they've really influenced a lot of the work that we're doing.
The some of the obstacles that we see, and this is kind of what the work has become, which is, our objective is to make sure that the decisions that we make are calculated and based upon reality. And there's different versions of reality, obviously. People have different ways they see the world. But I think for us, we really try to take a practical approach at providing solutions and opportunities to the tribal communities and the Indigenous populations and the other people that we work with. Because there's a lot of things that we've been able to do with very little. And so we know when it comes to community organizing, it comes to these discussions and creating, those spaces, we know that we've always been able to do a lot with a little. And it's not because we wanted to, it's just because we come from these impoverished, tribal communities, and they just don't have resources and people don't have things. And so, my reservation is one of those examples, right? Where we're talking about really impoverished spaces and mass homelessness and lots of other issues that are, social issues that stem from, historical trauma. And more importantly, they come from white supremacy, and they come from that type of authoritarian system that has intentionally been structurally put there to eradicate and dismantle my people's structure, whether that be culturally or genetically. And so I think our objective is to look at all of these things and find out how we can move forward. And so moving forward is a whole different concept when we're talking about racism, right? We're talking about racism, and we're talking about the prejudice that exists and all the problems that are there. We don't look at the work and say, okay, we're just going to move forward and not acknowledge what's happened and we just want to be better. It doesn't really work like that. In order to do the work and do the work well, that comes with a lot of healing. And so first thing we have to do is remove the knife from our back, and then we have to bandage each other up so we can just keep moving. We don't look at the wound and try to not acknowledge what happened. We absolutely have to acknowledge that principle, but it becomes more of a strategic game, because we understand that anytime we have a discussion in America, anytime that people of color, the BIPOC community is bringing forward the issue and wanting to talk about race or wanting to talk about inequality or injustice or any of those issues, there's never going to be a good time in, white America to talk about race. It's just not, it's not what the culture is built upon. And if had it had been built that way institutionally or academically, then we would have had a whole different kind of outlook. But it's the institutions at the top that have made it inherently, immoral or wrong or unethical to have those discussions when it does pertain to the life cycle and the well-being of the people that are being disenfranchised. So what we do is we look at the issue at hand, we figure out how we become more resilient and find more creative and more definitive ways of crossing over those messages. And so the way that we've gone about doing it is this: by building alliances with people, by creating networks within other networks of people who are not going to get stuck in the rut of feeling disenfranchised, but people who are really just fueled by creation and who want to make things. And I think that that's kind of the energy that we've embraced through Tribal Minds and the work that we do, because I mean, I can't tell you how easy it would be for us to just kind of be stuck in like a victimized mindset. And like, don't get me wrong, like there's entirely moments of my day or my life where I'm like, holy shit, like we're just a part of this system. Like that happens. But we try to pull ourselves out of that place to not feel so disenfranchised or disempowered. So I think it's a fine dance. And I think that it's a dance that I think white America doesn't always understand, because they don't have to code switch or shift gears. Like the system is in place for them to just be and flourish, as where other people are going to be struggling. Now, when you're looking at Black and Brown communities, there's a lot of resemblance to the oppression that has occurred to our people. And so I think we can find a lot of similarities or co-occurrences in that space, because we're dealing with the same type of oppressive systems. But, nonetheless, I think, trying to look at it from a different place. I'm not saying it's a place of absolute forgiveness or joy or hand in hand. Like we're not like walking down the road, like skipping. I mean, I think we're really practical in the work that we do. And, with Ethan and Teresa and the work that we've done, we know that we can make a lot of difference if we come from a place of love. I think that we've had a great success when we talk to people and we make the bonds. When you make a bond with people, when you make a bond with their mind, with their heart, when you see people and they see you, you can talk about anything.
True.
It's the problem in this country is that there is no connectivity. So anytime people bring something that you don't like, it creates a divisive nature, and people are automatically, they're resistant to that process. But I mean, our objective is to create a much larger family base of people. And this is family people. You're not always going to agree with your family. So, I mean, that's kind of what that looks like. But I'm going to kick it back to Teresa if she has anything to add.
And then Misha and Jodi, if anybody on the Zoom, if they have any questions, can they type them in the chat and then we can engage?
For sure, we want to answer some questions. So if you guys have anything out there, please throw it out there.
Yeah, we mentioned that in the beginning, but some people have come on later. So thank you very much for that reminder. Definitely people on Facebook, in the podcast, on the Facebook, or here on the actual webinar. Please feel free to tell us where you're calling in from, where you're watching from, what questions you might have. We'll be monitoring those. And then also here in the webinar, Brian and Teresa, as you see them, you can certainly change gears if you would like to. So
okay.
And then I put up in the chat, I did put up the link to the NV Native Vote Facebook page. So we're still in that process of building out our social media presence for the different the nonprofit and the different projects that we're working on. But I did add some of that information in there. I don't know if we have any questions right now.
No, I'm not seeing any right now. I know we have a couple of questions.
Okay, let's go for it.
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
And I just wanted to mention, Brian, I'm so glad you talked about that connection and that we need to have connection to be able to really look at systemic oppression and racism, and to be able to find better ways. And it's just so interesting, because I think every webinar we've had every panelist has talked about that we need to connect as humans, to really look at changing how we operate with one another, how we see each other, and to be able to love one another in a way that is needed in this country and globally. So I'm really, it's interesting. And that you talked, Brian, a little bit about regarding similarities in systemic racism to all BIPOC members. So I wonder if you can expand on that, but also talk about differences specific to the Native Americans.
Absolutely. This is great. I mean, I love this discussion. We were on a large meeting last night, actually. So I'm the chair of the Nevada Statewide Native American Caucus. Teresa's the vice chair, and we have an e-board delegation of people throughout the state of Nevada from lots of different tribes that that come together to try to resolve the issue and try to bring forth positive solutions and find corrections to certain social problems or economic problems or political problems. And so as the caucus we work with a lot of people within the state of Nevada. So last night we had a conversation. It was a forum that was hosted by the Native Caucus, the Black Caucus in the state, and the Veterans Caucus. So we had those three groups in one space, and a lot of people of color, right? So you just figure like the forum like we're in right now is just full of these beautiful people, and they're just in there and they're just engaged and ready to have a discussion. But the conversation was that we were really bringing to the forefront, potential leaders who were going to run for a position within the state party system, and that they wanted to be these leaders, and they want to hold space that way, which is fine. I mean, that's what people are going to do, and that's the name of the game. But at the end of the day is we have these constituency caucuses and these people of color that have their own unique needs, right? There's an indigenous need that we know that needs to be set and met at the state level. And for the statewide Black Caucus, they have a really specific need as well. And the Veterans Caucus is no different. So when we start communicating and interchanging what our life experiences are and where we are, we find that we're falling very similarly in the same, sandpit. And in this instance, we're talking about the Democratic Party within the state of Nevada. So, and I think, especially after this previous election, the Trump administration went out, the Biden administration came in. One of the things that we didn't want to see occur within that party structure, especially as these constituency caucuses, is we didn't want to see white, progressive, liberal Democrats pat themselves on the back and say, good, those guys over there are racist and we're cool, like we're all right. And I think it was that behavior or that really quick modification that really brought us to this place to have a greater discussion, because at the end of the day, people's ability to be complacent to racism, people's ability to be silent and not speak up or not stand up or create opportunities or room or modification for these problems and systemic racism doesn't make you not a racist. It just makes you quiet. It just makes you docile and compliant to what is occurring. And we wanted to, as members of this party structure, we felt that it was important to bring that message back to the party and say, you don't get a pass. You don't get a pass, even though we're in the same organization, fighting for the same rights and the same opportunities. You don't get a pass. That's not going to happen. These are the boundaries. If you're going to be a leader and you want to be a leader, know that you will receive pushback. Know that we are not just swinging our arms or flailing with, anything that is not based on fact. We are coming at you as professional organizations, and we know what we're talking about, and we know what we want to see, and you will, do what you need to do as an elected official, or we're going to, we're going to be doing this quite a bit. So I think that was what that discussion was. And so I think some of those similarities, again, institutional racism, microaggressions, conscious and implicit biases. There was a lot of things that were occurring, really poor communication styles. There's a problem in communication, right? The way that Native people communicate is very different than the way Black people communicate. Like, we're all working in these spaces, but the people of color in those spaces can agree to these things and say, you know what, when it comes to communication, we all have different nuances of communication. But in the party structure, it's like, let's communicate like affluent, entitled, privileged white people. So you have to talk the way we talk, and you have to let the way we talk at each other, and we're going to talk at you that way too. And that's where everyone's
Brian,
like, oh, hell no, that's not going to happen.
I want to hop in there. So I like what Brian said, that, you know, just because folks may be consider themselves progressive or Democrats, like, you don't get a pass. And the expectation is that you're still going to look at yourself and your privileges and the things that are hard for you to consider and to grapple with about your own history and the history of your ancestors. And one of the things that we've seen is, like Brian was talking about, the communication style. So it's important, representation matters. And so we know it's important for people of diverse backgrounds to be in positions of influence and leadership. And so at times we'll see where there's a seat that's made available, or there's a position that's created in the name of diversity or inclusion or whatever. But what often happens is what Brian is speaking to is that we're expected to fit into the existing culture and structures and molds, instead of like looking at, you know, real inclusion, real diversity. So as we're bringing these different perspectives and life experience, we know the culture of that organization is going to shift. Just because you bring Black, Indigenous, and people of color into these new spaces, you should not expect that those systems are not going to change. We bring those people in because we want the structure to change, the culture to change. It needs to change. We live in a world that's just leading towards self-destruction and continued isolation and continued, destruction of our home. And so we have to change the way that we're doing. And so I hope that as we're talking more about inclusion, it's not just creating a seat at the table, but then knowing there's going to be a cultural shift and we need to move towards cultural shift. Brian, there's 2 questions that I'd like to address. So the first one is from Ethan. His ears are ringing. So Ethan is wondering, how do we keep our progressive leaders accountable?
So I again, you know, the discussion we're talking about now is how we were involved with the Democratic Party in the state of Nevada. Now, I want to take it a step back and say that why were we engaged with that party structure? Why were we doing what we were doing to begin with, right? And it just comes down to the fact that there's lots of tribes and the tribal sovereignty and the identity of the people that live in the state that have been disenfranchised and marginalized. So at the end of the day, if you're looking at who's going to support you, who's not going to support you, we live in Nevada and there's a lot of rural space in Nevada. So outside of Reno and Las Vegas, the rest of the state is very red in nature. And so there's a lot of racism and there's a lot of crazy things that happen in the rural parts of the state, and a lot of problems, systemic problems that have been there forever. And the tribes that live out there in rural spaces, they feel this and they face it every day. So at the end of the day, when they're having this kind of conversation and they're figuring out how they're going to vote or figure things out, you know, it feels like there's an easier transition to fall in league with the Democratic Party, especially when the people on the other side of the street are saying, we don't like you, we're going to build a wall on you, we don't like your skin color. So, I mean, these are really easy discernments that people are making, and some of them don't necessarily have to do a policy. It's just the way that they're being treated and interacted with. And so that's how that kind of works. So going forward with the progressiveness of that, we liken the work that we do, the care with the land, the protection of our environment, the protection of harmony and, you know, human rights and civil rights. We look at those things as Indigenous people and say, we've been fighting for those things forever. The term progressive just became a nouveau thing right now. And so somehow that became the thing to do. But now the white progressive movement is the thing to do minus the people of color. So at some point, it's like, you don't get to, like, I don't know what that looks like. And I don't know why it is the way it is, but it's become a safe demarcation for people to hide out and say, oh no, we've all resolved that. We've already resolved racism. We're good. I have a Black friend, like, we're good. People just like, they take these liberties and then they move beyond it. But I would say that when it comes to leadership, when it comes to progressive leaders, I'm a leader, you're a leader, Teresa's a leader. At any particular point, somebody can challenge us and say, look, man, what are you doing? And they should be able to do that, because if you're a leader, then you have to handle the criticisms that come with that leadership position. And so when it comes to the progressive leadership, the progressive white leadership in the Democratic Party, they don't get a pass either. Nobody's going to get a pass in this. We're not going to get a pass. There's a lot of things we have to be accountable for in our communities. There's a lot of work we have to do in our communities that only we can do. And even though we want help and support, there's a lot of cleaning up we need to take care of, things that are way beyond the scope of this conversation. But there's things that we know we have to do. And I'm sure that if you had conversations with, you know, the Black leaders, they would say the same thing. We got some things we got to clean up. We got some things.
And that's
There
the
is another
definition
question.
of systemic racism right there. The
Yeah.
fact that some people feel like because of where they are and what they do, they get a pass. Right? We don't have to speak the truth. We don't have to bring up the dirt. We don't have to, you know, talk about what's real. We're progressive, so therefore we're doing everything for everyone, and it's bullshit.
Yeah, it is. So I know there was another question in there. What was the secondary question?
Okay, yeah, let me, I can read that to you. Yeah, thank you so much, Christina. So here it is. I am always asked this by my white colleagues. What can we do? When I have talked about challenging their own white supremacy and trying to make space for the BIPOC, they become defensive. Whoops, where'd it go? Oh, there it went. Okay. For example, advocating for BIPOC positions. I myself am making a job switch to make space for a Black candidate, although I am mixed. And I get many responses like, oh, but you found another job. Oh, but others want to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So what can I suggest that white colleagues do that make them less defensive?
You want to jump in this, Teresa, or do you want me to jump in there?
I think I can start, and then you can fill in. And then also there's some comments in the chat if you want to read that too, Brian.
All right, I'm going to go through.
So I think the heart of the question is about representation and then white fragility. And so we know that we have to make space, and we know that we need to make culture changes. We know that the systems that we work in continue to support white supremacy and male, superiority. Those are realities. There's research. We're not making this shit up. That's what it is. And so, and there's a lot of people who are afraid of change. I took a class in undergrad once. It was a sociology class, and it was just like the theory of change. How people would do almost anything, including going back to an unhealthy situation, to just go back to some kind of normalcy. So we know, and that's one of the things we're hearing about during the pandemic, all the mental health issues. It's like all this rapid change at once is causing a lot of mental distress. So we know that this is stressful for a lot of people, the idea of change. And I think for a lot of people, it's like idea of losing power. So instead of thinking that the pie is expanding, there's enough for everybody, there's a fear of loss. And so I recognize that. And personally, and I think probably Brian would agree, we seem to have the best results in these conversations when we can have heartfelt conversations, when people are really able to listen, because there are some people who will present as if they're progressive or woke or interested in learning, but then it's like, it's almost like I feel like you're pandering to me and that you are telling me what I need to hear. And there's other people who will just say like, I hadn't thought about my own experience. I hadn't thought about my own privilege. I don't know much about this community or this experience, but I want to listen. I want to learn more. And you can hear the authenticity or not. And I always think that that's really important. And I feel like we've been hearing that in a lot of conversations lately, but sometimes you don't hear that either, where it's just like, I didn't know, and I'm not going to do anything about it. So I'm comfortable where I'm at.
Or I did know, and I don't know what I can do about it, so therefore I'm not going to try.
Yeah, there's a lot of that too, and I want to answer part of that question by first making a declaration that in this country, right? And when I say this country, when I say like America, like this country, whatever, I think sometimes people take that out of context. I'm saying that as an indigenous person of this land, this is our land. So as this country, like I'm not saying like, if you don't like the government, get out of the government. I'm saying, no, this is our land. So this is Indian land. If you're here, you're in Indian land, wherever the hell you are in the United States, like this is Indian land, this is what's going on. And so the indigenous people of the land will have an entirely different perspective of the use of the land. So when organizations, businesses, corporations, if you're in Nevada, it's mining, or it could be oil in Texas, wherever. When people are talking about the resources, they're talking about divvying out resources of the land that came from the indigenous people. So people are making a huge upswing in their ability to provide themselves services or whatever it is, you know, whatever kind of institutional benefit there is off of the resources of this land. And so when we look back at where we come from as indigenous people, and, you know, going through the boarding school era, termination, reservation systems, everything else, what have it, understand that we're talking about the system came in, eradicated, killed, you know, used biological components of warfare and mutilation to decimate our people and kill us off by millions. And so when they did that, they put us on remote reservations where food won't grow and water doesn't run. And so they took the land where we would normally be, the beautiful places that we prayed in Yosemite and, you know, Yellowstone, and the places where we would have lived and have been, and took it for themselves. They kicked us out. They put us in a shitty situation, took it for themselves, and now they wonder why we're not all right. So here's why we're not all right. So in the United States, we have felt, you know, we have dealt with this, you know, this systemic problem forever. And when we look at our Black brothers and sisters, we look at their situation and we look at that kind of strife and we say, holy shit, we can relate to your situation because we exactly see the same kind of mechanisms in place that keep you in a weird situation. Now, I said all that to bring it here, to say that in America, when we talk about race and inclusion and diversity or whatever, somehow the discussion becomes that diversity is 50% white people and 50% everybody else to fit in the space. And that's how it feels, and it's come across, and how it's being presented subconsciously in some way, where it's like, well, as long as the room, the board, the office, the boardroom, as long as the white people are in power, the person bringing our mail can be Black, right? Or we can have one, you know, Latina, you know, person in accounting or whatever. But as long as the institution maintains its core identity and function, we're good. And so that's really what this diversity discussion comes a lot of the time. And the vying for resources is the same way, right? It's almost like, well, what do I do in this situation when somebody want to come in the job or something else want to happen? If you look at it in the totality of all the circumstances, there's a huge misrepresentation all across the board. If indigenous people, if native people of this land, if the American Indian is 4 to 5% of the total population, then we need to be 4 to 5% of the total population in economics, institutional processes of academia, and everything across the board. Same thing with the Black communities or the Hispanic communities and everything else. So we see a major disproportion of people in those spaces, and that's a problem. And it goes everywhere across the board, from your institutional processes of governance to your law enforcement, to your academic systems, and everything else across the board. So, I mean,
I want to make sure we answer this question where she's asking for some specifics on what can we do. But as you mentioned that about, you know, this being a problem, systemic problem that's across these different, you know, areas of government and service. I work in education. So when we addressed this issue and we looked at, you know, the significant changes that need to happen across universities. So like in a university setting or a school setting. So we know that, you know, first we have to address recruitment and retention. So that could be considered in the workplace or in governance. So who are we inviting into this space? Who are we serving? So there has to be reform in how we outreach to communities. Are we just scouting for student athletes at predominantly white affluent schools? Are we visiting reservations? Are we visiting urban Black communities? So look at what does that outreach recruitment look like for our staff or our students or whatever that those stakeholders are. Then it's looking at our administration. So what are our HR policies? Do we have a diversity statement, diversity policies? Do we hold our staff accountable to racism, to how they treat people and how they evaluate their employees? So we look at HR and we look at the administration process and the structure of the institution. And then we look at the financial aspect. Are our Black and brown people and students, are they being paid equally? No. Or women or people of diverse backgrounds, are they being paid equally? Are they getting scholarships? Are they applying for aid? Do they understand the processes? So when we look at how we support BIPOC communities, it isn't just creating a seat at the table, it's exchanging the entire structure of the organization and really spending a lot of time and having a lot of conversations to make sure that we systematically change the structure. So we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but there's a lot of bubble bath. There's all kinds of stuff that's mixing it up. And then to give some specific examples of things that people can do, one of the easiest things that people can do to support Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and if the easiest thing is to share the wealth. So if you want to make a donation to a nonprofit that's doing amazing work, there's so many nonprofits out there. And so you can do a Google search to find, ones that are in line. Do you value food sovereignty? Is it social justice? Is it legal support? Is it education? There's a lot of amazing groups and they're always fighting for funds. So institutions, funders, philanthropy funds Black, Indigenous, people of color communities at like 8%, and then like 92% goes to white communities. So we know there's a huge deficiency in funding, but then even things like when your coworkers or your relatives or your neighbors, when you're seeing injustice against people of color or of a disenfranchised group, and they need your voice to step up. Like right now we're in the 2021 Nevada legislative session. So there's a bill right now on supporting multicultural education, and a whole bunch of people came up from the homeschool sector saying they don't want anybody telling them what they have to do and what they need to implement, and how a multicultural education is divisive and they don't see color. So it's like, vote for elected officials who recognize that we need change, vote for women and vote for people of color, vote for our LGBTQ. So voting, funding, standing up and using your voice to support people of color in your communities and your spaces. Those are three I came up with at some point.
I'd like to add, one more thing, and just real quick, and I'll jump out of there just before I lose that train of thought. I just want to also say that what we're talking about here is a philosophical and even existential reach in some regard. So I get it. So I like to have these discussions, and we have a discussion with people. I'm saying, look, let's just think about this as like a training atmosphere, right? We're going to make a lot of mistakes here, but you won't know things if you don't ask questions. And don't be so timid or afraid to not ask the question, because then you're not going to learn, and we're not going to know if you don't know. So, I mean, our job isn't to educate you all day long and spend, our time trying to be that for you. But we can also, just like any other thing, there's still common courtesy and things that we can do that's not going to take any energy away from us to talk about whatever. So as far as us, as how we're communicating, I give you an example. Like in tribal communities, it's so common to talk to people. You see tribal people, even people you don't know, and you're like, hey man, what are you? Tell me, what are you? What tribe are you? Who are you? What are you? And if you're talking about in other communities or cultures, they're that's really rude. What are you doing? For us, we're no. And people running up on each other, what are you? And they're like, oh, well, I'm this tribe. I'm mixed with all this other stuff. And so it becomes a really invasive interaction, but it's normal for us. So we don't mind doing it. And so I think because we've really assessed our genealogy to the sense that we, embrace who we are and what we're made of, we feel the same way about other people. And we're saying, we want to talk, we want to know what you are as well. What are you? And so I think that discussion becomes part of the, that space. But because we're coming from these indigenous communities, we're talking about a cultural, tribalism that puts us in this, in this mode when we're talking about we, it's really we as an inclusive. So when things happen to us, we are experiencing it at a great rate. And when we see these injustices, it impacts all of us. In America, there's this real individualistic practice that everybody's just taking care of themselves and they only give a shit about themselves. And that has been something that's been done forever. since a time when it was just like white landowners having everything they wanted and nobody gave a shit about what was happening. As long as they had their land and their horses and their slaves and a couple women or whatever, like they were fine. But anything that was happening to the Black people, it didn't matter what was happening, it was going to be all of them. Same thing with natives, it's going to be all of them. And so we are still in circumstances where we are having to think about how we as a body of people are going to survive this circumstance. We don't get to jump ship and change our skin color or our circumstances to fit in and blend and cross over. So if white America is struggling in their mind of trying to find solutions, you could easily just change your mind and do something else with your life and never give a damn again if you really wanted to. But we don't get to get out of the fight. We're not going to get out of this without any kind of like discussion or trying to find remedy. Like we really have to do the work. So if you want a solution, or if there's something in your mind that you want help with, ask some questions. This is a great forum, ask some questions. But I would also say this, understand that the turbulence and the struggle that communities are going through, BIPOC communities, LGBT communities, and anybody who's under this, system of oppression, that it's a lot of work. And these people have to they need a lot of support because we're going up against institutions that have been designed to disable us.
So I just want to say one thing, because Jodi's a white woman. I'm a Jewish white woman. There's been a lot of different classifications. And I'm wondering almost if Christina, this question is really directed to us, and how do white people how do you help them when they get defensive? So I want to kind of address that just from my perspective of having been told 3 years ago, I used a term and I had no idea it was a racist term. And my friend turned to me and said, "That's racist." And I looked at her and I said, "What?" I mean, I was terrified and I got defensive. And I said, I never knew. I'm not a racist, and I defended being an anti-racist, not a racist. And the reality is, the more I stayed in my ignorance around that term, the more racist I was. And so when she was able to say to me, "Misha, why don't you do some reading about it? I can't tell you more than what I know. Do some reading about it." It started to really feed into my heart, like, holy crap. There's a lot of things that I grew up, not because of my family, but because of people in school and whatever else, learning how to say, and not I wouldn't say enormous amount, but enough that it was racist. And so I think that when somebody says to me gently saying, I definitely don't want to upset you, and I want us to have a heart-to-heart connection, I'm feeling uncomfortable because what you're saying or what you're doing feels racist. I'm not going to attack you and say you are racist, but I would like to invite you to do some more learning around that. And you can ask me questions, or you can pick up this book. Here's an idea. If you'd like some resources, let me know, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think that there's this thing in the white world to defend each other. "Oh, you're not racist. You're so sweet. You have such a good heart." And we can have good hearts and still be racist. And so I think it's important that, with this question that I want to read it one more time that Christina is asking, and Christina, you have said you are a mixed person. So what you're saying is you get different responses from people. And what can I suggest that white colleagues do to make themselves less defensive? And I think that the introductory thing would be, I'm feeling uncomfortable sharing with you something that I'm feeling because I'm worried that you're going to be defensive. But this touches me to the core. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to hear what I have to say, because I care about you and I know you care about me. And I know it may take longer than just saying, "That's racist, go read." But it's that heart-to-heart connection that Brian was talking about. And I know you were nodding your head a lot, so I don't know if you had something you wanted to add to that. I just felt like I had to kind of say, as I have to take responsibility for my own education. We've been reading books like crazy. We've had a small stint of not reading anything because we've had family in the hospital and this and that and the other. But we're still doing these webinars because we want to get the word out there. But I don't know if you had...
Yeah, well, I think I was thinking more, one of the difficulties, myself included, is complacency. As a white woman,
Yes.
I'm not as privileged as a white male, but I am still a white educated woman, and it's easily can fall into complacency and view things through white lens, because that was my upbringing. And I think that is a difficult thing for people to overcome, myself included, even though I'm doing all this. And as a society, we have to figure that out, because in that white complacency and that power structure that our society is comprised of is where so much it lies with systemic oppression and what's happening.
You know what's interesting, Jodi and Misha, is that, you know, we're speaking English right now, right? So we're having this discussion in English. And we're having this discussion in English because that is the colonized language of this space. You go down south, it'll be Spanish. You go up north, it'll be French. So, or if you're in other places, you'll have a different language. But Teresa and I have entirely different languages. And we have languages that come from our land and that come from our space, and that they are of the environment, and we are of that environment because of our language. Mm-hmm. And so I think what I find to be complicated, and I sit on the fence with this a lot, because part of me is like, I want to be understanding to people's not knowing things. But on the other end, if you're an adult and you don't know shit, then you have to take ownership of what you don't know. Yes. And be like, I guess I'm just ignorant to it. I guess I just didn't give a damn enough to learn something.
Right.
So if you really are genuinely and sincerely wanting to learn, you will learn, because that's a part of what you want for yourself. Even if it's not to look like a racist. People work really hard to not look like a racist. They'll actually do a lot of research so they don't appear to be racist. So there's a lot of things that people can do if they really wanted to know. But, you know, taking that a step further, I would say this. I would say that, you know, the way in which we look at the world, you know, and the way in which we understand the world has a lot to do with how we look in the environment that we're in. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you're from the BIPOC community and you know you're going to be in these spaces and you don't look like that, just try to imagine what those people that don't look like the majority are feeling in that moment. Right? Just try to put yourself in their place and say, I wonder what that person feels like. This is, you know, and a lot of times people don't ever feel like that, right? And that's why you see a lot of white flight out of urban areas, or you know, you see gentrification or anything else. It's like, I just want to be where I'm comfortable. And a lot of times people do that. And you look at the white world of wellness, it's the same thing. It's like, well, I want to go to a yoga studio and it's like, everyone looks like me and we're just having a great time. This is great. This is beautiful. In Nevada, we have Burning Man, right? Which is this giant, like crazy event that happens in the desert. And it's like, people are like, this is the best day of my life. It's the most amazing thing I've ever been to, Burning Man. It's like, yeah, because there's no people of color out here. You guys get to act like fools, but there's nobody that looks like any of us in that space. So of course it's going to be amazing, because it's just you guys being cool amongst yourself. But I wanted to take that a step further, and I want to talk about like the Western mindset. Mm-hmm. So Western mindset, we're talking about, you know, philosophy or mathematics or arithmetic or science, right? We're speaking English, we're talking science, we're talking logistics, we're talking about quantitative approaches and empirical, you know, biases. We're talking about all these things, which I think is very interesting, because the white American, white academics, people who are in those spaces, they make careers, they build institutions, and they say, we want to dissect and we want to create a periodic chart of every element in this world. We want to identify every plant, every animal, and we want to give it a scientific name. We want to categorize everything. So for a culture of people that love to dissect and categorize everything, you say they don't understand and can't understand racism is bullshit. You can, you just don't care to.
It's a choice.
You can categorize anything, you can figure out anything, because you do figure out the things you want to figure out. You don't figure out the stuff you don't want to figure out. So don't tell me you can't figure this out, because we have to figure out how to exist in a white world that's not created or for the benefit of us. So you can figure this stuff out from your privileged perch. You can figure it out.
I was just thinking about the pandemic and how much of our lives changed, and all these new things that we had to learn how to do, work from home. We created all new HR policies. We figured out how to run our businesses with people, most of our staff teleworking, and we moved all of our schools online, our institutions of higher education online. We all learned how to use Zoom. If there are things that we value and that we find a need in, we will make the time, we'll read the books, we'll Google things, we'll find it on YouTube. And so Ethan, Misha, and Jodi, and then Brian, like everybody agreed that we all are responsible for our own education in these areas that we may not be well informed in. And also, Christina, I also wanted to give you some reassurance that, you know, we're having these difficult communities with even people within our own communities who are stuck in these like oppressed mindsets and colonized mindsets. So not only are, you know, Indigenous and Black and people of color having to have these conversations about calling out white supremacy and calling out racism in, you know, the institutions we work in and live in, but then also having those conversations with our relatives saying we're never going to get ahead if you keep being the first ones to step us down before we can even get to ask. While we're talking about things that people can do to support Indigenous people, Deb Haaland is up for confirmation for the Secretary of the Interior, and there is some concern of lack of support from some Republican senators. So there are petitions circulating right now. We're asking people to call their senators to support Deb Haaland for Secretary of the Interior. She'll be the first Native American secretary, and Indigenous nations fall under the Interior. So
What's her full name again?
Deb Haaland. Is it H-A-A-L-A-N-D, I believe?
So, yeah.
Haaland.
Yep, and there's a petition. You know, I can put it in the chat box too.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you.
You know, I love these discussions, and I love the discussions because I feel like we have these discussions, and then it's like we can have these conversations that are hard with our families and the people that we know in our life, and say, look, we're going to go through this really hard thing, and then we're going to hug it out afterwards, but we got to get this thing done. Like, because we know that we're dealing with, you know, trauma and strain and this kind of social apathy, and so we have to resolve it. And so, I mean, it can be dense, and it is, and it's only that way because we've never dealt with it. So it's like you know, we have a responsibility now in 2021 to be the people that we want to be, to hand down the messages and the lessons to the people who are coming now. So you, whoever you are out there watching this, understand you have a very important role to play in the future of humanity and where we are. And so your ability to be impactful or helpful or supportive or open-minded at the very least is really your responsibility, because all of us are in a creative space right now. And there's a lot of things we don't know. So understand that as we're having the discussion, there's so much that we don't know. I mean, we started this discussion talking about how much we didn't know, right? The only reason we can have a race conversation at this point is because we were living the experience and have lived it. And we're able to convey that and articulate that message through professional means of doing so. But imagine the people that are out there right now who don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the fortitude or the ability to communicate and convey that message. They can't articulate for themselves how they feel. They just feel frustration. They just feel anger. They feel basic emotion towards a thing they don't understand. And that goes both ways. Mm-hmm. So I just want to let everybody know, it's like, we don't, you know, intend to continue down this communication path to make anybody feel uncomfortable or, you know, wrong in their doing. But if we weren't uncomfortable just a little bit, we wouldn't be doing our job. We have to be uncomfortable to do the work. And that's at a, you know, in a professional space, an academic space, and especially in a spiritual space. There has to be some give, a little push and pull in this work. So, you know, I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I look forward to more, you know, more moments like this for sure.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, appreciate that. So we have about 7 minutes. I would say if anyone that is attending or listening, if you want a question answered, now's the time to put it in the chat or put it on the Facebook or podcast areas. We are monitoring that. And Brian and Teresa, do you have anything that you think you really want to share with everyone that's listening in this last moments we have together?
I do. Whenever we're given an opportunity to speak, so it's like looking for those opportunities to share a message. So even Christina, that's another way. Like, even if you have this message that you want to help get out in your communities, every time that I have an opportunity to share a message, that general thought is, I want to remind people, like Brian mentioned, that we all live on this beautiful land, which is stolen Indigenous land. I think it's important for everybody who lives in America, in North America, recognizes that truth. So when we talk about Indigenous issues and why we're asking for reform, why we're asking for improvements, it's from that basic understanding that this is Indigenous land that we all benefit from, and that we all have ties to some place in this world. And that some place for the indigenous people of this continent is this place. There's no other place in the world where our ancestors' bones nourish the soil and flow into the rivers and the lakes and the sea. Like our ceremonial bundles are in these mountains, or in the soil, or up in those trees. It's like, this is the place for us. There's no other place in the world. We, as individuals on this planet, there's some place like that for all of us. We all have an ancestral homeland. Whether or not we've lost that connection or don't have a lot of information about that place, then it's all on us to find out where that place is for us and our people and our relatives and our ancestors. And when you find that place, you'll always know that place. You feel it when you get there. It's like tingling through your body. That put your hand in the soil and it's like, this is my place and my home. When I left Michigan to move to Nevada, it was hard for me to leave my homeland. I was excited for the new opportunities and to create a new home with my husband and his home lands here in the Great Basin here in Nevada. But it was almost like I had to tell my ancestors that I love you and I will always be back and I'll do what I can to take care of my people here in this place. I'm going to go to this other place for right now. When you talk about place like that, I think it gives it a different context. This is not just Nevada or Pennsylvania or Michigan or wherever you are. There are stories to these mountains and to these lakes that cannot be replaced and cannot be erased. So when we talk about, no, you cannot divert the water from Pyramid Lake or from Lake Tahoe or suck it out of our ground so that you can build these subdivisions and this one white man is going to get really rich. Like, you have to understand where we're coming from. This place cannot be replaced. And these people, you can remove them, but their place is always right here to this specific place. So I always like to remind people that the connection to the land is really important. Wherever our individual connections are, to whatever lakes and mountains and valleys that we have a connection to, we all have a connection to somewhere. And I think that's really important when we think about what is that connection to place. When Brian was talking about when we ask people who their tribe is, it's not just like a curiosity, but it's like, I need to know who you are. Where do you come from? Who are your people? Where's your place? And then I understand you better in our relationship. Same here when we talk about systems of oppression, like, who are you? Where's your place? What is our connection? And I think that's really a central part of thinking about how are we connected? How do we relate with one another? How do we communicate with one another? How do we understand where other people are coming from? A lot of times it's just like self-centeredness and isolation and not understanding the connection or relationship.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything my wife said. I think the connection is built upon empathy. So when we're asking people what your story is, it's like, how can we relate with your life and then care for you from there? How can we hear you, see all of you, and then care about you, and then recognize that you have an importance on this land? That's why we ask who you are, what you are, what's going on with you, because like we give a damn. And so I think we're talking about economics. I think sometimes it's like, well, the discussion's like, well, what Ivy League school did you go to? And what neighborhood do you live in? And what are your resources? And I think that in that world, right, in that type of environment, nobody matters. The only thing that matters is people's economic position and how much authority and power they have in an institution. So when we're having those discussions, it really removes the human element, in my opinion, from what we could be. Because just saying that you have a position or power or resources or you come from wealth, it doesn't replace your humanity. It doesn't replace like what your connection was. And so I think in that regard, as we're having these discussions and everything moving forward, I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, our ability to connect with each other, even if it's cathartic, even if it is built in some type of suffering that we've experienced, in what that relationship is moving forward. Because I don't think for us that we pretend that, you know, we have hardship. We know we come from hard places. We know we come from suffering. We know what that looks like. Even in the pandemic right now, where people are like, don't wear a mask, who cares? There's nothing real about it. We've lost so many people. I've lost like 12 relatives since March to COVID. We've lost like 20 or 30 friends since COVID on top of the relationships. So in our communities, like I said, because we are so connected, when death happens, it happens fast and it happens to all of us. And when life happens, it happens fast, it happens to all of us. When poverty happens, it happens fast and to all of us, and so on and so forth. So when individual experiences are not the things that we experience, we are very much a collective body. So that's why we're saying when we can empower all of our people to lift up, then we will all get there. And until we all get there, we are all going to suffer. And that's what the Black communities are suffering. The Latin communities, like our communities, like all of these communities that are going through this process are experiencing the same strife. Because it's not just me as an individual. I can't get a great job, run to a different community and think I'm going to evade racism or structural problems. It's going to be everywhere I go because I carry myself in those spaces. Not that I'm trying to carry a conversation about racism, but it's going to be in those places because those places at the top, economically profitable places where people are secure in their belief systems, they're not having those discussions. And they don't want to have those discussions because it makes them uncomfortable. So, you know, I think we have to find solutions. We have to listen. We have to be aware. And we have to remember that our humanity is at stake here. And that we have a really big part to play in resolving these things. And that comes down to listening and being aware. So if you want to know more about us and you want to know more about the work that we do, please reach out. Our nonprofit is Tribal Minds Incorporated. If you want to help, please help. We're always looking for help. We have a really small team, but we do so much. We can always use the resource. So that's honest. Like that's upfront and personal. Like we do what we can do and give back so much time with little resource. So please, if you're out there and you want to help, you can help that way. I'm like trying to run from the sun. The sun's like right in my eyeball.
The sun clearly loves you.
But you know that, please follow us on social media, follow us on our pages. You can, you know, communicate. We'll have more information. I'm sure Misha will have more information on here too. You want to know more about Nevada and the work that we're doing, you can listen to my podcast, Coffee with an Indian. You'll know what's up there. So
Brian and Teresa, thank you so much for joining us today. Just so many wonderful wealth of information that you've given to all the listeners, and we really appreciate your time. I can say I really, appreciate both of you speaking to the fact that we are on Indigenous land and all the land here is Indigenous, and that we are connected to land and connected to each other, and that's how we're going to find our humanity again. And for me, it was wonderful. I just needed to hear that message again. I think it's so easy to forget that piece that I am always on Indigenous land. So I appreciate your time today, your words of wisdom, and all that work that you're doing. And as a reminder, again, a great way to support the BIPOC community is to donate time and money, if you have it, to the nonprofits that support them and their businesses, and help get them elected into positions. Vote, get out and vote, get them elected into positions, and support them being in different positions within organizations.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Thank you so much. And I do need to make an announcement as far as folks for our next webinar. We're actually having an extra webinar for this month in honor of Black History Month. We will be talking with Brenda K. Johnson. She is a retired United States Army Reserve officer, identifies as Black woman. After leaving military service, she homeschooled her son and daughter for 5 years while working part-time, starting a business and volunteering within her community. The Business Creative Edge Enterprises competed and won 2 franchise locations with the Philadelphia International Airport and Eddie's Ice Cream and Pizzeria Uno. And she's also attended California Polytech State University as a speech communications major and completed her Bachelor of Science in Liberal Arts with a concentration in communications at Excelsior College. She is also co-authoring a book with a prison inmate named Xavier Zane called The One World Order. And so we're very excited to have her on our webinar on Sunday, the 28th of February. We will post the links for signing up for that one. All these webinars are free. We do provide either funding or publicity or charity donations to our panelists, usually out of pocket, but if you would like to either contribute to them directly, we will get you those links for Brian and Teresa. We also take Venmo at Misha-S-Joy, and then we are able to use those funds to help pay for this webinar, the Zoom, and also for our guests. So look to having further support. Please spread the word. If you are a part of the BIPOC community and you would like to be a panelist on this webinar, A Candid Conversation about Systemic Racism, we will also send out and post those links in the Facebook group, and when you are, those of you who attended or those of you who missed the webinar, you'll be getting that in a follow-up email. So yeah, with that, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your authenticity. And of course, we'll go back to that one very important word. Thank you for the connection. Yeah.
For sure.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
And we'll end the live streaming now.
Awesome. Thank you.